Hi, my name is Jennifer. I live here in Rochester, New York, and the time of this video is roughly springtime of 2014. And I thought that it was necessary that I tell you when the taping of this video is, because it's important for, I guess, our purposes, mine especially, to have some sense of what it is that I want to share with you about my human trafficking story and my issue, and the time and place in which I'm explaining this to you is I'm a 50-year-old woman who is recalling and recanting something that started happening to me roughly around the age of 11 years old. I don't really talk much about what happened to me because I've spoken about it many times and unfortunately didn't get the results that I wanted, like some assistance or help from family members or persons within my community. And I also don't spend much of my time in my current life talking about what happened to me, as I'm 50 and I don't know how much time I have ahead of me. According to the Bible, they say you have 70, so that means 70. I really don't want to spend the next 20 years recanting and retelling what had happened to me, as I have a lot of living to do. But I'm very happy to be here with you today through technology to share a little bit about what had happened to me, and I guess in some way what still happens to me. So here we go. When I was 9 years old, my father had passed away very suddenly. He had cancer, and his cancer really depleted him and ate him up alive. And my mother was always sort of an emotionally vacant person. She was very hard to get to know, and she, I don't think, really wanted to be a parent. And she was really, I think, ill-prepared to be especially a single parent after my father passed away. And she was very interested in meeting her own emotional and physical needs. And I think that now that I look back, it means that at what cost, and I realized it was at the cost of my sanity, my body, my emotional well-being, my spirit, and everything else. So what happened to me is something that really can happen to anybody very easily. I refer to people like myself as separated from the herd, meaning I was an only child, so that made my stepfather's pursuit of me relatively easy. My father had just died. My mother was emotionally unavailable and emotionally very vacant from me, very distant. And I think he saw an opportunity. And in the very beginning with my stepfather, I was very conflicted because he sort of came into our lives very, very quickly, which I now realize as a 50-year-old woman. I realized it some time ago, but just sharing with you where I'm at today. I realized even quite a long time ago, I thought it was very peculiar how quickly he moved into our lives, and how our lives all of a sudden really had no history, had no past, and everything was all about pleasing him and making him happy, etc. And I remember a few distinct things when my abuse issues started to occur. I didn't even know it was abuse. This was the 1970s, and back in my day, people just never discussed these issues. And in my house, we didn't discuss sexuality, we didn't discuss intimacy. In fact, I don't really remember discussing very much of anything, but especially these matters, very private, intimate matters. And I remember with my stepfather, he spent a lot of time with me in the very beginning when he entered the scene into our very small family. And at first I was very happy that he was around. My father had just recently passed away. My mother was really unapproachable, and he sort of seemed very fun to me. And now that I realize the amount of time that he spent with me, he was really grooming me. He was in his mind, I think, setting the whole circumstance up for the following, well, it was 4 years of his abuse. And in the very beginning, I was happy to be around him. I didn't feel threatened. I didn't feel I don't know, burdened, encumbered. I didn't feel like anything was inappropriate. In fact, I just remember a lot of ice cream cones, and I remember a lot of days out, and that sort of, was much more pleasant than my former circumstance with a father that was dying in a hospital. And so, somewhere around the age of about, I'd say about 10, 11 years old, he would ask me for a kiss. He'd say, after he'd bought me a present, he would say, can I have a kiss? And that didn't really bother me in the very beginning either, because it was always on his cheek. And then as time continued to move forward, he would make an attempt for this kiss to move closer to more intimate aspects of his person, such as his lips, etc. And I was very uncomfortable, but I didn't really say anything because I was afraid of several things. I'll tell you what that was. I was afraid that I was going to cause a problem and he would go away, and then I'd be blamed for it. And that was sort of suggested to me by my mother and my grandmother with a particular phrase I would hear very often called, and I'm quoting this phrase, I still hear this phrase in my sleep. I would hear the phrase, "Don't ruin this for your mother, or don't ruin this for me, because I'm finally happy." And so I'd hear this, and so I wouldn't say anything. And then after puberty had hit in my life, as it often does, and I started to go out with boys, to movies or wherever, we would go out in groups. And I think my stepfather felt very threatened. And again, he had to assert his dominance over me. And that's when the actual sexual abuse that was extremely intense started to begin. And I had told my mother that I was very concerned about lack of birth control. I had come out and told her that he was inappropriate with me, and she literally didn't even address it. She said nothing to me, in fact. And I had later found out from her, she's since passed away in the year 2000, and she had later shared with me many years later that she was actually rather resentful towards me, that I was a competition to her. And you have to remember, I was a child, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. It stopped when I was 15 because I was removed from the house. And she was resentful. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, pardon me, my mother's mother, she also instructed me not to say anything to anybody, and she was fully aware of what was going on. And my stepfather would supply her, my grandmother, and my mother with many material gifts that ordinarily we could never have afforded. And I guess that was the payment for my abuse and suffering. I don't know, everybody else seemed to get something from it other than me, other than I've had a long lifetime of issues, obviously stemming from what had happened to me. I later found out that my aunt knew, and I guess that level of betrayal, till this day I have a very hard time dealing with it. And the humorous aspect of all this, in a strange way, is that the remaining family members that I have that are alive, they don't dispute what happened to me. In fact, they all acknowledge what happened to me because they're aware, and they were there. But they're very angry that I continue to bring it up. They're very angry that I've written books about the subject. They're very angry that I discuss the subject so readily. And they would just prefer I stop. They would prefer that I just make this go away somehow, and that I just move on with my life. And why do I have to keep bringing it up? And why do I have to do conferences? And why do I have to continue to tell my story? And it really upsets them, and it bothers them. It doesn't seem to bother them that because of my being trafficked and sexually abused, it's caused me PTSD issues, sleep issues, personal intimacy issues. And it's something that no matter how much counseling I get, no matter how much medication there is for me to take, I'm always going to walk around with what happened to me for 4 very long years of my life. And I have to say that if I'm thankful for anything, it's truly that I was taken out of that house and away from that family, my own family, because ultimately what was going to happen, my stepfather, I know for a fact, had plans on passing me around to his family members. And I can tell you I would never have survived that because I barely survived what I survived with my stepfather. As I close this small little picture of my life, which certainly doesn't address everything, it can happen to anybody. It can happen really in any situation. Sometimes you can even be in a situation where you do all the right things like I did and you tell people and they still don't listen. I really have no advisement even till this day about that, what to do about that. And I guess the thing that I find most profound in my own circumstance and in working with other men and women that have been trafficked, I think it's important to say that it's a part of you that never really goes away. And so because of that, I've had to somehow make it work for me. I know that sounds very peculiar, but I think that's why I spend so much of my career working with persons that are victims of crime and human trafficking, prostitution, etc., domestic violence, seminar on sexual violence. I do a lot of teaching and a lot of street work because there has to be some place for me to go after all this trauma that I've suffered. And you know, a lot of people say, well, you know, it must get better with time. Time really doesn't solve anything. It's just something that's numbers that pass on a clock. And just to wrap this up for you, I remember I had this Vietnam veteran who I really didn't know at all, but he was in a support group, and he said to me one day, he said, what you've been through with your stepfather for 4 years is like a prisoner of war, but except the war was in your own home, and you were captive by the people that really should have been protecting you, yet they were making out like bandits, fur coats and trips overseas and whatever else, while I just continually suffered. I was unable to finish high school, never went to a prom. I've had a lot of things that I've missed because of these circumstances that befell upon me. And I appreciate him saying that to me because really there's no place to go with this level of victimization that I endured. And I know what people do go through, and it's a very intense circumstance, or as we say in criminal justice, event. We call them events. Event that you never really get over. And there isn't enough therapy in the world, but sometimes I guess I could hope for enough understanding in the world, and that, you know, people view people like myself as people who are still very worthwhile, but we have very significant issues that does separate us from other people just by virtue of what we've been through. So I hope that gives you some kind of a glimmer as to what it is people like myself have suffered. Maybe if you saw me in an elevator or in a lobby of a building or in the mall, you would look at me and you would say, oh, she looks like somebody else's mom, or she looks like everybody else. And I guess in many ways I do, but it's until you really speak to somebody that you really have no idea what they've been through. So I wish you all the best of luck, and good night.